The latter down by 38, Ethan Mercer had built the kind of resume that made strangers lean in at dinner parties. Finance, then logistics, a SaaS startup that nearly went public, then enterprise software, then e-commerce, then cloud infrastructure sales at one of the largest technology companies in America. He had been an analyst, a project manager, an operations lead, a director of customer success. He had a LinkedIn profile that recruiters bookmarked, a salary that embarrassed him to say out loud, and a vesting schedule of stock options that, if everything went right, would set his family up for life. He was not an executive, but he was close enough to taste it, close enough that people at the company began folding him into conversations they used to have without him. And every morning, before the alarm, before the coffee, before the first Slack notification lit up his phone on the nightstand, Ethan woke up exhausted. Not the kind of exhaustion that sleep repairs. He slept fine, mostly. It was something underneath that, something that had been accumulating for years like sediment at the bottom of a river, until the water above it ran slow and dark. He had spent nearly 15 years moving from company to company, each one promising a better culture, a better balance, better leadership than the last. He believed them every time. And every time, after the honeymoon of a new badge and a new org chart, the environment settled back into the same shape, the way water always finds its level. There were offices with sleeping pods and neon signs on the walls that said things like, "Change the world" and "Move fast." There were cafeterias serving gourmet meals at all hours, free of charge, which Ethan had thought was generosity until the night he looked up from his desk at 8:40 and realized the free dinner was the reason he was still there. There were foosball tables and meditation rooms and rooftop lounges, kombucha on tap, quarterly offsites in the mountains, and an endless rotating vocabulary of words like synergy and ownership and work-life integration. It took him years to understand the architecture of it. The free dinners were not a gift. They were a quiet incentive to stay until 9. The game rooms were not about play. They were about keeping bodies inside the building, blurring the line between the desk and the rest of life until the desk simply absorbed everything. The wellness seminars existed because the workloads themselves had become a kind of illness, and rather than treat the cause, the company handed out aspirin and called it culture. Leadership talked endlessly about balance, but the performance reviews told the truth, and the truth was that the people who got promoted were the ones who answered messages at midnight. The company called it passion. Ethan came to think of it as addiction dressed in a company hoodie. The startup years were the worst. 80-hour weeks defended as commitment. Constant restructuring that meant your manager in March was gone by June. 26-year-old vice presidents trying to make their names by wringing one more sprint out of a burned-out team. One boss liked to dress people down in front of the whole department, a performance of leadership that left grown adults staring at their laptops to keep their faces still. Another demanded weekend availability while posting, every Sunday, the same genre of photograph, children on a beach, a caption about how family was everything. Ethan had a panic attack in an airport bathroom in Denver once, between a delayed flight and a client dinner, sitting on the closed lid of a toilet with his tie loosened, counting his breaths until the gray edges of his vision pulled back. He told no one. He had stared at the same spreadsheet for 20 minutes on a Tuesday, unable to make the numbers resolve into meaning, certain something was wrong with his brain. He had sat in an all-hands meeting where a vice president cried, genuinely cried, about the difficult decision the company had made, and then read the names of the difficult decision off a slide while 400 people learned in real time whether they still had jobs. Every time he reached what felt like solid ground, the ground moved. A merger, a reorganization, a strategic pivot announced in a memo that used the word journey 4 times. The money got better. His life got worse. He kept assuming these 2 facts would eventually cancel each other out, and they never did. Then the pandemic came, and for a few strange weeks, Ethan believed it might save him. No commute. No fluorescent lights humming over the cubicles. No hallway politics, no ambient pressure of watching the parking lot to see whose car was still there at 7. He set up a desk by the window and thought, finally, on my own terms. Instead, work simply walked into the house and took off its shoes. The meetings started earlier because there was no commute to protect the morning. The emails came later because there was no drive home to end the day. The boundary between work and life, already thin, dissolved completely. His laptop sat open on the kitchen table like a member of the family who never left. And in the middle of all of it, his wife, Sophia, gave birth to their son. They named him Noah. Ethan held him in the delivery room and felt the floor of his life shift, though he could not yet say toward what. The afternoon he remembers most came when Noah was 4 months old. Ethan was on a quarterly forecasting call, camera off, headphones in, while in the next room, Noah was crying, the particular cry that meant nothing was wrong except that he was small and the world was large. Sophia walked past the doorway with the baby on her shoulder, and Ethan saw her face for half a second before she was gone again. She looked the way he felt. The dishes had been in the sink since morning. His phone buzzed against the table, then buzzed again. A private message from his manager slid into the corner of his screen, over the forecast slides. Need you fully engaged here. Ethan muted himself. He took out one earbud, then the other. The voices on the call shrank to a tinny murmur on the desk. Noah cried. The dishwasher he had meant to load sat empty. And he looked at the wall in front of him, a blank, rented wall, for a long time. Nothing dramatic happened. He did not throw the laptop. He did not stand up and quit. What broke in him broke the way a beam breaks after years of carrying a load it was never rated for. A long, quiet failure that has already happened by the time you hear the sound. That night, they sat on the small balcony of their apartment. Sophia held Noah, who had finally surrendered to sleep. The city made its city noises below them. I don't think I can keep doing this, Ethan said. He had not planned to say it. It came out of him plainly, the way true things sometimes do. Sophia didn't answer right away. She rocked the baby. She watched the traffic. Then maybe we stop, she said. He turned to look at her. Stop what? Living like this. She wasn't crying. She wasn't building toward an argument. She said it the way you'd point out that a window had been left open. Not stop working, not give up, just stop living like this. The sentence followed him for weeks. He'd be in a meeting and hear it. He'd be brushing his teeth and hear it. Maybe we stop. It frightened him because he could not find the flaw in it. The thing that finally moved him came 3 months later in a company-wide email with the subject line, Building Our Culture Together. Mandatory return to office 5 days a week beginning in the fall. The email spoke of reconnection, of the magic that happens when teams share a room, of innovation that could not zoomed into existence. Ethan read it twice and heard none of those words. What he heard was the I-405 at 7:40 in the morning. What he heard was the badge reader and the open floor plan and the manager who walked the aisles. What he heard was the machine, which had been patient through the pandemic, finally calling its parts back to their stations. That same week, an old colleague messaged him out of nowhere. The man had left tech 2 years earlier and dropped off the radar, and now here he was in a photo on a balcony in Chiang Mai, in northern Thailand, looking like a different and better rested person. A simple apartment, a cost of living that made his modest remote salary feel generous, mornings with his kids, time, the man wrote, that actually belonged to him. It sounded, at first, like a thing other people did. Reckless, a little embarrassing, the kind of decision you'd have to explain at every holiday for the rest of your life. But Ethan started reading. Then he started making spreadsheets, the one skill the corporate years had given him that he didn't resent. Then, late at night while Sophia and Noah slept, he started to dream, which he had not done in years. 6 months later, he did the thing that none of them could understand. He accepted what every person in his professional life would have called a step down. A remote sales role at a mid-sized international company nobody at his old firm had heard of. No prestige. No logo anyone would recognize on a resume. No title that opened doors. Just a steady income he could live on and the freedom to do the work from anywhere with a decent connection. His parents, who had spent 15 years telling their friends which famous company their son worked for, went quiet on the phone. His former coworkers were less quiet. One of them, a man Ethan had once respected, told him directly, "You're walking away right before your peak earning years. You understand that, right?" Maybe he was. Ethan had run the numbers. He knew exactly what he was leaving on the table, down to the dollar. He just no longer believed the table was worth sitting at. He sold most of what they owned. The furniture, the second car, the road bike he'd ridden 4 times in 3 years. He kept books, photographs, and a box of Noah's first things. They packed the rest of their lives into 4 suitcases and a stroller, and they flew to Chiang Mai. It was strange at first, in a way that unsettled him before it healed him. Too quiet, too slow, too human. The street smelled of grilled meat and lemongrass and rain on warm concrete and motorbike exhaust all at once. Vendors smiled at him for no reason he could monetize. People sat outside in the evenings and simply talked, with no apparent agenda, no networking, no one glancing at a watch. The markets overflowed with fruit, and when Ethan bit into a mango, it tasted like something he had forgotten existed. The vegetables tasted alive. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he ate a meal without a phone in his hand. He began to sleep through the night. He walked with his family in the evenings down lanes lit by string lights instead of sitting in brake light traffic on a freeway. Noah learned to walk on uneven ground, in open air, surrounded by people who slowed down to smile at a small boy, instead of spending 12 hours a day inside a fluorescent room with 30 other children and 3 tired adults. And slowly, in the quiet, Ethan understood how numb he had let himself become. He'd built a whole self around the numbness, called it focus, called it drive. Here, where people smiled at each other and meant it, where a greeting was not a transaction, the numbness had nowhere to hide. It unsettled him. Then, over weeks and months, it began to lift. But peace, he would learn, has a way of testing the people who find it. 2 years in, America came calling again. The companies that had emptied their offices were filling them once more, and the war for talent had reignited. His old colleagues reached out, half in friendship and half in disbelief that he was still out there. There's serious money back in tech. You'd walk into a director role now, maybe higher. Remote work is dying, man. The window's closing. Recruiters who had ignored his story now found it interesting. The offers came in, and some of them were enormous. Numbers that would have ended every financial worry he'd ever had, that would have rebuilt the table he walked away from twice as large. For a few weeks, Ethan let himself want it. He lay awake doing the math he was so good at. He thought about the title, about his parents finally being able to name the company again, about the kind of security that lets you stop calculating. He drafted a reply to one recruiter 3 separate times and deleted it 3 separate times. He told himself he was being responsible. He told himself a man with a family could not turn his nose up at that kind of money. The morning it resolved, he was at a small cafe near their apartment, the one with the wobbly table they always took. Sophia was reading. He had the recruiter's email open on his phone, his thumb hovering over the reply, and across the courtyard, Noah, 3 years old now, was crouched on the stones, laughing helplessly as a fat pigeon waddled toward the crumbs he was scattering with both fists. No meeting waited. No notification pulled at him. There was just his son, in the morning light, delighted by a bird. And Ethan understood, with a clarity that almost hurt, that the man who would take the offer and the man sitting at this table were no longer the same man. The old Ethan would have sacrificed this morning for the title without a second thought, would not even have seen it as a sacrifice. This one could not. He closed the email. He didn't reply that day or the next. Eventually, he stopped replying to any of them, and the offers, like all offers, found other people. Instead, he started building something of his own. It was not glamorous. There was no venture capital, no founding myth, no podcast appearances about disruption. He sold ordinary, essential products online, the kind of practical, unsexy goods that businesses genuinely need and that ambitious people overlook precisely because there's no prestige in them. Boring products, reliable margins, a gritty, sales-driven little operation run from a laptop on a wobbly cafe table half a world away from where anyone expected him to be. For a long time, his family didn't get it. They had bragged for years about Ethan and his important job at his important company. Now, when relatives asked what he did, the answer, "He sells things online," from Thailand, landed in a silence that he learned to live with. No headquarters. No company name worth dropping. No title. To most people who had known the old Ethan, it looked like a man who had fallen and not yet noticed. But Ethan knew the one thing they didn't. For the first time in his adult life, his time was his own. The business grew the way real things grow, not in a rocket arc, but in fits and plateaus. A good month followed by a frightening one. He taught himself digital marketing, supplier negotiation, the unglamorous choreography of logistics and customer acquisition and international shipping. He solved problems at midnight, the same hours he'd once resented giving away. But the difference was total. The pressure was his now. It belonged to him the way a mortgage on a house you love is different from rent on a cell you can't leave. Because the work could travel, so did they. Vietnam, where Noah learned to slurp noodles. India, on a sleeper train that broke down for 6 hours in a landscape Ethan would remember for the rest of his life. Morocco, South Africa, Portugal, Malaysia. Small rented apartments and long bus rides and street markets and cold beaches and high mountains and cafes full of laptops and overheard conversations in 5 languages. It was not a luxury life. They did not fly business class or stay in resorts. It was something he valued more and had nearly missed entirely. It was freedom. Now and then, scrolling at night, Ethan would catch up with the lives he'd left. A former colleague posting with hard-won honesty about the burnout that had finally caught up with him. An executive he'd admired announcing a mental health leave. Friends from the old days quietly stepping away from corporate life in the wake of a divorce, a hospital scare, a marriage that had run out of evenings. Some of them had grown far wealthier than Ethan would ever be. A few of them seemed genuinely happy. Many of them did not. One evening, on a balcony in Bangkok with the city glittering below, Ethan watched Noah, older now, frowning over homework at the table, while Sophia moved around the small kitchen and something simmered that smelled like the start of a good night. His business was not worth millions. He was not famous. No conference would ever invite him to take the stage and explain his success. But he had peace. Not the marketed kind, not a meditation room or a kombucha tap, but the real thing, the kind that comes only after you've stopped running from something. And after spending most of his adult life chasing a definition of success that had been handed to him by people who did not have to live his life, Ethan had finally arrived at something simpler and truer and entirely his own. A balanced life was not a failure. Walking away from a fire that was consuming him was not weakness. And sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is climb down from a ladder that, no matter how high it goes, only ever leads somewhere he never wanted to be. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please follow the page. We're a new channel trying to reach more listeners like you, and your support truly helps us grow and continue sharing stories that matter. Don't forget to like and leave a comment. And if you have a story of your own you'd like to share, send it in. Our email is in the pinned comment and description below.